Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to episode 3 of Get Fresh with Consent. We're here with our friends and co-workers, Mikaela and Kiana. Today we'll be talking about red flags. So, before we get into the questions, do you guys want to introduce yourself and tell the viewers what you guys do in the organization?
Absolutely. Do you want to start or you want me to go? My name is Mikaela. I'm a domestic and family violence practitioner with the Centre for Women and Co. I've worked for the organisation for a few years now and done lots of different things. But excitingly, this week I've actually started in a new role working alongside Queensland Police Service as a co-responder model. Yeah.
And my name's Kiana. I am also a domestic and family violence specialist with the Centre for Women and Co. Also worked here for a few years in a number of different roles. So I'm doing a lot of interagency stuff, upskilling, relationship building here in the Logan region.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Awesome. Let's get into the first question. What are red flags in relationships?
Can we go?
Yeah.
So I reckon one of the biggest ones when I was reflecting on this question is when things move really quickly from the start. So we have a lot of people that we work with, especially young people, that come to us a few months down the track or a few years down the track, and they always say that things just escalated really quickly. And things were good at the start because that person was saying, I love you really quickly, and making them feel wanted. And then they were moving in together, and then maybe they got pregnant and they started a family really quickly. They're obviously the bigger things, but even in like when you're at school and stuff, things move quickly into saying boyfriend and girlfriend and saying you're in a relationship and saying you're exclusive when you actually don't really even know that person.
Yeah, and I think as well, like looking more at some of the finer things around red flags is, you know, that monitoring, wanting to know what you're doing with your phone, who are you texting, looking at all of your social media, making you feel like you have to get their approval for different things around that. Whilst that can be viewed as somebody being really caring and protective for you, it can be, quite a big red flag in terms of actually being quite controlling behaviour.
Yeah. And from that as well, similarly, is around, like Kiana was saying, there is a difference between really being really protective and then being really controlling. Yeah. But sometimes they can look really similar.
Yeah, very fine line.
Very, very fine line. And one of the big things is around jealousy. So someone actually displaying extreme jealousy towards you about your relationships with other people, about what you're doing, who you are. Yeah. That's a massive thing that can kind of come up really quickly and early on in a relationship. That can be a red flag.
Yeah, cool. If you're talking about how things can move pretty fast, in terms of the time frame, how does that look like? Or is that more intuition?
Yeah, I think so. When we're saying like things are moving really quickly, like it varies with lots of different relationships, but sometimes it can be a matter of a few days before things start to feel like, oh wow, like how did we even get to this point? Or sometimes it's, like I said, that longer term of it's a few months later or years later, and you can look back in retrospect. Everything's easier in retrospect, and be like, we should have maybe slowed it down at that point in time. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so the next question we have for you guys is, how can red flags show up in relationships, intimate relationships or even friendships?
Yeah, I think it can be really transferable across both in terms of, intimate relationships and friendships. I think when you look at like the feelings that you're having around that person can be a really good indicator of like red flags happening in that relationship. If you're feeling worse after spending time with them, you're feeling like you can't be yourself around them, they're not respecting your boundaries, all of those are really clear indicators that there's probably some really significant red flags happening in that relationship, whether it is with your boyfriend, girlfriend, your friendships, your friendship group, your family relationships. I think those feelings and that gut instinct that you have is usually a pretty big indicator of that showing up in the relationship.
We're probably going to say it a million times throughout this whole conversation, but trust your gut.
Okay.
Trust your gut. If you feel like something's off, or you feel like you're not yourself, or you can't be yourself, that's not okay. That's not okay in a relationship, and that's not a respectful relationship.
Yeah, and you want somebody that is going to make you feel safe and respect your boundaries, and you know, you've got that autonomy to be yourself and be who you are without having to change yourself for somebody to fit into maybe the ways that they expect you to be as well.
For young people, like I know that someone's red flags might be completely different to someone else's red flags. So like, you know, in friend groups, they might think that one thing's okay, but the other person isn't okay with that. Like, what do you say to that when people do have a friendship or a relationship where they're not on the same field with what that is?
I think that comes down to what Kiana said in terms of knowing what your boundaries are.
Yeah.
And yeah, everyone's boundaries are going to be different, and that takes time to figure out what that actually looks like for you. But again, it is around trusting your gut.
Yeah.
It is around surrounding yourself with people that make you feel good about being who you are. And if that's not the case, then that's when your boundaries are going to be, people are going to rub up against them.
And I think as well that if, you know, somebody, like we said, everybody does have different boundaries, different, you know, thresholds of what they're, you know, willing to accept in their lives and what they expect from people as well. But if, you know, somebody's actively communicating their boundaries to you and then somebody's not respecting that, I think that's, you know, that's where the issue lies, in that, you know, you have to be actually respecting those boundaries and acknowledging that they are different for every single person as well.
Okay, so what about green flags? What are they, and how can these show up in relationships?
Well, it's pretty much the opposite of everything we said before, and we have already kind of touched on it, in that it makes you feel good. It makes you feel good about being who you are as a person, where you're going, and trusting your gut around that as well. Most of the time you feel like you can say no or say yes and actually express yourself and express concerns in whatever relationship you're in. Because if you're scared and you're worried about what the consequences of you bringing an issue up, then that's not a green flag, that's a red flag. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think, definitely around, like, the way to look at it is about those feelings that come after that. And I think, you know, ultimately you want somebody that is, you know, respecting you and valuing you for who you are. And, you know, that can show up in ways of, them being really okay with you setting boundaries and saying no. And they might respond with, you know, you might go, I don't really feel like doing that, or that doesn't sit well with me. And they go, yeah, okay, like that makes sense. Like, or, you know, how can I support you through this time? Or, you know, that's okay that you're feeling that way. And really, flipping on those red flags to be like, if you're looking at that person going, yep, that person makes me feel really safe, comfortable, and I feel respected by them as well.
Like if you are spending time with that person and you feel like your cup is filled up, that's green flag.
Yeah. What about, like, more so the family relationship side of things? Like, it, you know, that can be in any type of relationship. So for people who might be in a situation at home and that person isn't respecting any of that, and they've tried to explain and, you know, show them what it might do to them if they're not respecting it, how can a young person, or just a person in general, like, navigate that type of relationship when they're just not, but it's a family, so you can't really cut ties, and it is a little bit more difficult.
I think like you're saying, like, it's not as easy as in lots of relationships, it's not as easy as just cutting ties and things will go away and things will get better. But again, knowing what your boundaries are and what you actually want out of different relationships. Not every relationship, unfortunately, is going to be full of the green flags that we've spoken about. It's reality. But knowing what your green flags are and what those healthy relationships are and what you need, and then seeking them somewhere else. It's not as easy as sometimes just being like, nah, I don't want this, especially if it's your brother, your sister, your mum, your dad. There's all of these different power dynamics in that as well. But seeking it somewhere else. So you do have a safe space to go and you do have someone to talk to.
And I think sometimes as well with, you know, seeking that kind of healthy relationship and green flags through somebody else can be really tricky. And that's where, you know, services are a really great space for that. Like, there's lots of you know, youth hubs that provide a lot of really great support for young people, you know, that's external and outside of their home. So it's finding those people that it might not be in the vicinity of your friends or your family, but there are people that will show you and model to you what a respectful and healthy relationship full of green flags looks like. And, once you've had that modeled to you, it kind of helps you then formulate your boundaries moving forward around.
If people show you, what their boundaries are and what that looks like to actually establish them and communicate that, that's how you learn.
Like every healthy relationship is going to have a red flag here and there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so the next question we have is gaslighting is a term that has really caught people's attention. Can you explain what it is?
Yes, I think this is me. Yep. Gaslighting actually comes from a term that it was based in an old, I think it was a theatre production or a movie in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. That's a very long period of time. It was a theatre production actually called Gaslighting, where the main protagonist in the production was using gaslights and flickering them on and off so that their wife would see it. But then the wife, when she'd say, "What's going on with the lights? Like, what's going on with the gas?" he'd actually turn around and say, "No, nothing's happening. What's going on?" So she felt like she was going crazy. She thought she was going crazy. He was trying to make her feel like she was going crazy. So essentially gaslighting, and the term comes from that, but we see it and it has been popularized now in lots of different situations and scenarios, and especially the media. It's when someone makes you feel like you're losing sense of your own reality, and people do that in lots of different ways. And the gaslighting, like theatre production, is like kind of the easiest way to understand that. I
think in young people it might show up in ways of they're questioning whether you did something, or if you're asking them around what they did and they're denying it, or denying that they had any involvement in something, like really making you kind of internalize and go, oh, hang on a minute, did I get that wrong? Like, was that me that, didn't understand that properly, when you might know the facts that actually occurred, or XYZ happened, and they've gone, no, that didn't happen, I didn't do that, or I didn't say that, like, you're crazy. You're overreacting, and really, making an effort to make somebody feel like they're not actually sure around what's going on.
And when we're talking about boundaries and healthy relationships, when someone's using gaslighting against you, it makes it really hard to actually figure out what your boundaries are, because you start to lose sense of what is actually happening, and your rights in that relationship as well, because you feel like you don't know what's going on.
Well, I'll move on to the next question, because it's started touching on that, which is, what are some common examples of gaslighting that often show up in young people's relationships?
I think that, there can definitely be like lots of different examples. If we're reflecting back on the definition of gaslighting, it might be around them saying, I love you, I would never hurt you, and then proceeding to do something that does hurt you, whether it is physically, emotionally. We do focus on emotional safety being as important as your physical safety, and saying things like that I would never hurt you, that's not something I would do, and then actively going against that. As well as, making you question your recollection of events as well. If there's something that you're sure that they did and they go, no, I didn't do that, you're crazy, and making you feel like your reaction and your understanding of that isn't valid. That's a really common one that we do see.
When you start to question something that's happened that's not okay for you, and they're telling you actively that you're overreacting or it's not worth the energy that you're putting into it, it's taking away your emotional capacity to actually respond to that situation and discredit what you're trying to say in your feelings.
And it goes back as well to really trusting your gut and knowing that your reaction is valid, and how you experience a situation is really valid for you as well, and making sure that you know, somebody is respecting your experience as opposed to making you feel like it is, you know, that you are really blowing it out of proportion, or you're making something out of nothing, you know, that kind of stuff. Those kind of statements as well is are really key to look out for in terms of somebody that may be gaslighting you or using elements of gaslighting.
Yeah, so a lot of things that discredit, like you said, like discredit what you feel or how you perceive a situation and stuff like that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it can be really tricky, I think, to identify some of those things, because you know, do internalize a lot of that. If somebody is gaslighting you, you go, okay, hang on, did I actually make the wrong assessment of this situation? Or maybe I didn't see that correctly, maybe I didn't hear that correctly, maybe it's a me issue, maybe I am to blame. And that ultimately is the goal of gaslighting. So, you know, it's making somebody question everything, which is not a nice feeling for anybody as well.
And then trying to navigate in a relationship with someone that maybe you really care about, or maybe you really want to be in a relationship with them, or I don't know, you place value on your time that you spend with them, and then trying to navigate all of these feelings of not feeling like you're worthy or your experience is valid, but then also wanting them to like you. It's so hard.
So like gaslighting, you could almost say that it's like them trying to cover up what they've done by turning it on you to make themselves look better again. Like they're like flipping it so it doesn't make them look bad.
It externalizes it. It's all on
projects
you.
it.
Projects it, and it's nothing to do with me. Can't take responsibility of
and it shifts that blame. It shifts that blame. They're not taking accountability for their own behaviours, or you know, maybe they have done something to upset that person, and in a healthy relationship it would be acknowledging that and going, okay, apologizing and saying, but in a really sincere way, and saying, yes, that may have upset you, how can we move forward from this, and how can we, you know, work on this together, as opposed to, you know, you did this and this is why I reacted that way, or you know, you're completely blowing this out of proportion and that's a you thing, not a me thing.
All right, so the last question we have is, what is coercion? I think we often see coercion show up in young people's relationship, but it's often dismissed, excused, or misunderstood. Can you guys please tell us what it is and how it might show up in young people's relationships?
Absolutely. So coercion or coercive control is a really big term when speaking about domestic and family violence and abuse. I like to think of it as a bit of an umbrella term in terms of the patterns of behaviours that make up abuse and control. So there is actually not one definition for coercive control that is kind of recognised around the world. There's lots of different understandings of that. But essentially, to simplify it is the best way, I think, to speak about coercive control and coercion in general, because the more people understand what it looks like and what it feels like in their relationships, the easier it is to identify those red flags and potentially get yourself out of a situation that you might not want to be in kind of long term. Simply coercive control and coercion is when someone makes you feel or do something through their actions that you might not necessarily actually want to do. So you might be forced to do it, or feel like you're forced to do it, or feel like you actually don't have a choice in the matter. It can be really insidious, or it can be really overt with the actions that they're actually taking as well. It's kind of taking away your ability to say no.
Or it might have been a pattern of behaviours that has led to a point where you actually feel really fearful to say no, or you're worried about the unintended consequences or the follow-up actions for someone. And if that's something you're questioning when you're making decisions, that's probably a really good indicator that there's elements of coercion happening in that relationship for you. These can be, coercive behaviours can come up in many different ways in relationships. It can be physical, emotional, financial, social, sexual,
spiritual,
cultural, psychological. There's so many different types, and we can, flesh out some examples of those around what that looks like and what might be some really key examples of that. But it's, like Mikaela said, it is a really big umbrella term for lots of different elements and behaviours. That can make it really, really quite tricky for a person to navigate. So I guess like some really common ones that we might see pop up are, stopping you from seeing your friends and family if they've, they make a fuss every time you're like, I've got a family event, or, that you want to go out and hang out with just your group of friends and not them, if they're making you feel bad about that decision, or, making up reasons that you need to stay or that they need you to be there to stop you from doing that. Like, that's an example of coercive behaviour. It can be, threatening to break up with you every time that you want to do something for yourself. So then you feel kind of that you're backed into this corner where you can't make a decision around, okay, well, do I want to lose this person that's threatening to break up with me that I really care about, but I want to go and see my friends. And if you're feeling like you're having this, back and forth, it's really tricky.
I think a really big one as well for young people who might be in same-sex relationships and aren't necessarily out yet, but threatening to out them to their families, their friendship groups, because that's obviously going to have an impact on that person's life and their relationships. And really, they've got them under their thumb, don't they? If they don't want that to happen, they're going to do everything in their power to stop it, and that gives that control back to the person who's threatening to do that.
Another really big one with young people as well. We know social media, everyone uses it all the time, but there's elements of coercive behaviour that can come from that in terms of stalking and monitoring. If they're making you keep your Snap Map locations on all the time so they know where you are at all times, who you might be with, that's not a green flag, that's a red flag. You've got a right to go places and be comfortable that somebody's not going to show up unannounced or pursue you at that location.
Another one around your sex life might be forcing you to do something that you're not ready to do or you're not comfortable in doing yet. We see that pop up a lot with young people. Like you're building relationships with people and you might be losing your virginity and doing all these fun, amazing things, but there is a fine line in relationships around consent and respect in the bedroom. And if you're feeling like you can't say no to something that you're not ready to do or you're not comfortable with, then that's absolutely coercive control. Yeah. I think in terms of when you're asking what can young people do in their relationships when we start to notice these red flags or coercive control, is like we've said a million times, trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right for you, trust it. Trust your gut and go to someone safe and someone who is supportive and tell them what's happening for you.
There's lots of support out there, and lots of resources as well, like online, if it's safe for you to look at, in terms of identifying red flags, identifying abusive behaviours, and then it also will link you to those right supports that can support you if you don't feel like there's people in your world that can at that time, or that you can trust or feel comfortable that they're going to handle your situation with sensitivity and empathy, because it's not easy to walk up to someone and say, hey, this is what's happening for me, can you help me, or is this okay? And if you don't have people in your life that have modelled healthy relationships to you, or you've got depictions of relationships that are full of red flags in your life, it can be really hard to work out those avenues of who to talk to. And
I think we've spoken a lot about someone who might be in a relationship with someone who's using those abusive or like behaviours and red flags and stuff like that. What about the other way around? Like you said, if you've been brought up in a household or a place that hasn't been very healthy and that's all you've really known, like saying something around like, you know, you can unlearn those and you're not going to be stuck in those ways and you don't actually have to follow what you've grown up with, and that there are support services out for people who are realising like, oh, maybe my behaviours aren't healthy and maybe it's not actually very nice what I've been doing.
I think, definitely there is supports out there that can help somebody identify that. Also, I guess the thing that we maybe didn't touch on is that, you know, the use of, or like red flags popping up in a relationship, the use of coercive behaviour, it's all an intentional choice on behalf of that person that's using those behaviours. So, you know, they're still making a conscious decision to go, okay, I'm going to threaten to, you know, break up with you, or I'm going to threaten to tell all these people something about you that you don't want them to know to get you to do X, Y, and Z, or not do X, Y, and Z. And I think that's a really key thing to remember when having these conversations, is that somebody's always got an active choice. So they've got an active choice to, you know, seek out supports and find people that can help them if they are concerned about using those behaviours, or, you know, I think
it comes down to empathy and respect. Like, if you can put yourself in someone else's shoes and know that what you're doing, saying, how you're being in a relationship is not okay, then change.
Personalising it, making it easier. Cool. Thank you so much for coming along today. We really appreciate you guys making the time to come and chat with us. Next week we have episode 4 coming out, which is influencers' versions of mental health, with special guests JJ and Chantel. And that is all for today. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.